Nice one, Latanda.
Brant did not mention live.
Yes.
Okay, you're live.
Thank you. We are now calling this meeting to order, this meeting of the Akron Civil Rights Commission. Right at the outset, before I'm going to ask if I can get a volunteer for somebody to take notes and keep minutes, because our secretary has resigned. We're going to hopefully elect a new secretary during this meeting, but for today, we're going to need a volunteer. I should have probably warned you that this was going to be a need. So do we have a volunteer to keep minutes?
I will volunteer.
Thank you. And I mentioned that I'm going to ask that we move 2 of the agenda items up earlier. So items 4C, 1 and 2, I'm going to ask that we do those after the first 2 items on the agenda, the approval of the minutes and the suspension of the rules. That's because we have guests visiting, and I thought that we might allow them to present first and not require them to stick around for the whole meeting. So are there any objections to amending the agenda in that way? I see no objections, and so we'll go ahead and do that. So the first item on the agenda is still approval of the June meeting minutes that were emailed out from Cindy Christman. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes.
I see Commissioner Pitt has a motion. Any second? Commissioner Maddox is seconding. Any discussion or corrections? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? So that motion passes and the minutes are approved. Secondly, we're going to ask that we suspend the rules that require in-person attendance, in-person voting, or in-person public comment. For these remote meetings, we're going to do this at the beginning of every meeting. So that, I presume that needs a motion. Can I just make that motion? And is there a second?
Second.
Gina K seconds. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, any abstentions? In my judgment, that motion carries. So we're going to suspend the rules requiring in-person attendance at this remote meeting. So now we're taking up 4C2, and this is our guest is Lauren Green Hull from Fair Housing Contact Services, and she is going to talk to us about an issue that came up in the eviction task force regarding regarding a potential amendment to our ordinance. So Lauren, can you tell us what this is about?
Thank you all so much for letting me chat with you today. I really appreciate it. I believe the vast majority of you know who I am, but I'm Lauren Green Hall. As Brant said, I'm the Associate Director at Fair Housing Contact Service. One of the things that our agency does in our community currently is that we lead the eviction task force for our community. If you don't know, Akron is 24th in the nation for its rate of evictions, and there is a large concern about how evictions are going to proceed now that the courts are reopening, and the impact that COVID is going to have on our community is bringing to light a lot of concerns around housing that we think that there could be something that the Akron Civil Rights Commission could be a part of potentially addressing. As you know, the Civil Rights Commissions can handle cases for any protected class in the ordinance. So that's anything from race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, and family status that are protected at our national level, to also our local protections here in Akron, like sexual orientation, gender identity, and age. What we, the eviction task force, is considering proposing at City Council, and working with City Council members, and ideally all of you as the Akron Civil Rights Commission, is that there would be a proposal that there would be an additional protected class added to the city ordinance, and that would be source of income. This is an protected class that is being discussed around the country and has passed, and lots of the communities in the Cuyahoga County area have added this protection, but it's nothing that has been added in our local area in any municipality in Summit County. And we believe that with that protection, there could be some added benefits for renters who are in need of assistance, financial assistance, to be able to cover their housing costs. So when I say source of income, that is a protection that traditionally is used to protect individuals who receive some sort of financial assistance for their rent. So whether they're utilizing a housing choice voucher, maybe they're getting assistance from rapid rehousing funds that in our community, United Way and Battered Women's Shelter allocate, or maybe they're getting funds from PRC, which are funds that come through Department of Job and Family Services when somebody's having a hard time paying their rent. And so there's lots of different areas where folks could get assistance, but when that assistance is not coming out of somebody's own personal pocket and needs to be paid directly to a housing provider, then that housing provider does not have any requirement to accept that money. So that's why we'll see here in our community, like in advertisements, no Section 8, and that's not illegal. That's not a protected class, having a housing choice voucher in our area. So therefore, housing providers can technically treat people differently or discriminate because they have a voucher. Unfortunately, in our community, there are huge disparities when it comes to who's utilizing the funds, whether it's a housing choice voucher, whether it's rental assistance funds or anything like that. And those disparities are based on race, they're based on disability, they're based on family status. So all those protected classes that you guys already are looking at. Adding this protected class would allow housing providers to be able to still screen their tenants and on all the screening factors that they currently use, but they would just need to consider this source of their income. So this, whether it's, rental assistance, short-term, long-term, or anything like that, they would need to consider that as part of the income when they do their evaluation for a tenant. And if you don't know, there has been $6.5 million that is being flooded into our community for rental and mortgage assistance. The problem with that, and it's wonderful, Fair Housing Contact Service is fully supporting this. We're working with the Department of Job and Family Services, the county, United Way with these funds. It's fabulous. However, our concern is that landlords aren't required to take that money. So somebody that's gotten behind on rent because of COVID and could be eligible for these funds they could be in a situation where they could still be evicted because the landlord is not required to accept those funds. And so with this protection, and if the Civil Rights Commission would be willing to work with us to propose this and support this legislation, then we would really appreciate that and want to partner with you guys on that and get your support for this potential legislation that the Eviction Task Force is considering proposing. So just want to take some time here today to share that information with you and also answer any questions you may have about this type of protection, how it would work, anything like that. So I'll take any questions unless Brian has something else he wants me to say.
Yeah, I would add two things. And before I do that, I just want to let you know, the other person on your screen is Carl Smallwood. He's here for the next presentation. So just so you don't have to wonder who's this person on your Brady Bunch grid. So the two things I was going to mention is that just full disclosure, during this last semester, I had law students in the social justice lawyering class who were working with the Eviction Task Force on developing this legislative proposal. So they drafted language, potential language. They did some research on what other communities have this kind of protection. So just to let you know, I have some background knowledge about how this developed. And the second thing I just wanted to mention before we open it up for questions is that it's just to recognize, so this is not a role that we have taken on up until now, right? We have not necessarily involved ourselves in any recommendations about what our statute should say or how it should change, other than sort of for technical or procedural reasons. But I don't think it's unusual for a commission with a mission like ours to decide that they want to have a say in the ordinance that gives us our mandate, right? So it's a little bit of a two-step here, right? It's, do we think that's an appropriate role for us? Do we sort of want to take that on? And then if so, with regard to this particular proposal, are we interested? And it is not something that we have to sort of decide on today, but today is where we sort of learn about what the proposal is. So any questions? Yes.
Lauren, my question is this: what is the objection to accepting these funds, regardless of where they come from? Why are landlords or property owners reluctant to accept those funds?
So what we see when it comes to sort of a one-time or short-term assistance, landlords are a little more likely to accept it. So especially in a situation like this, where our entire community has been impacted in some way, shape, or form due to COVID, whether you've lost your job or not, folks who are. So many housing providers are struggling because they aren't able to pay their bills because their tenants can't pay them their rent. And so they'd be able, with these short-term funds, to get caught up and be able to move forward. So the short-term funds aren't as contentious a lot of times as long-term funds are. So long-term funds meaning your traditional voucher situation, your housing choice voucher, Section 8 voucher that somebody is using and will be using for a lengthy period of time. And sometimes even the other rapid rehousing funds or things like that are a little bit longer term, like 9 months or so. There's requirements that go along with them, like an inspection, and you have to meet certain housing quality standards, or you have to provide documentation or things of that sort. And a lot of times landlords just don't want to deal with it. They don't want the federal government in their business. They don't want any government in their business. This is my house. I can do what I want with it. I don't want those people there. That's also a very common thing we hear. So there's lots of reasons. A lot of times, though, it does come back to they feel that the restrictions that are required on them or any sort of requirements that come along with accepting these funds will prohibit them to do their business. And that is something that we try and do a lot of education around for housing providers, but unfortunately, they still just are really reluctant at times. And that goes back to a lack of information, a lot of misinformation, and a lot of stereotypes, I believe, that go along with who's utilizing these funds. And that which then continues to perpetuate the disparities in our community as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Lauren, for the purpose of the minutes, would you please spell your last name?
Yeah. It is Green, just like the color, GREEN -HULL. Sorry, my Zoom account that I'm using right now is my agency account, so it doesn't say my name on there. I apologize for that.
Thank you.
Nanette, you had a question. I have to unmute myself.
Yeah, I partly, not actually a question. I think just I really would support this because it feels to me that what's coded into this is a way of advocating for people who are living in poverty and that they should not be discriminated against. And we had a forum at the church where we brought landlords together and were speaking with people as we begin to think of the depth of the housing. This was pre-COVID, so some of the stuff has gotten even more heightened since COVID-19, and we're aware of that, but we were beginning to realize that we needed to pay attention more and become involved more, Lauren, with what you're doing. And we heard some staggering stereotyping about who does accept, for example, Section 8 and who doesn't. And I think there's a lot there that feels very discriminatory to me, and it's based on prejudice that leads us to discriminate. And I think that as a commission, certainly as a commissioner, if I speak for myself, that is something that I feel we were put in place to try and rectify, because I know that even some of those people who hold those stereotypes still want to see a community that is whole and healthy and happy. So if we can help achieve that through this legislation, it feels like a natural extension of what we already have in place, and I would advocate that we would support it.
Yeah. So just a couple statistics for you all if you really want to know. So and these are rough statistics. I'd have to pull up something in front of me to give you the exact ones. But in Summit County, voucher holders are about 65% community households of color, but only make up 13% of our population. And so when you're looking at huge numbers of housing providers, especially outside of the city of Akron, but inside the city of Akron in certain neighborhoods, especially, then we see folks who won't accept vouchers really just turns into, we won't rent to Black people, is usually what that boils down to. And that's not okay. It's definitely not okay for our agency. It's not okay for our community. But when we look at those numbers and we are now identifying ways to be able to directly impact that, then we want to make that happen. We know in communities where source of income protections exist that landlords find their way around it, just like they find their way around race discrimination and disability discrimination and every other protected class. We know that, and there's ways that they're going to be able to do that. But with the protection in place, that we'll be able to do more advocacy and ideally do more education so that housing providers can really understand that the barriers that they think exist in accepting these funds don't actually exist. You know, the housing quality standards for a Section 8 voucher aren't really much more than what somebody needs to maintain under building code. And if your property's not up to building code, then that's a whole other issue that needs to be dealt with. So that's where between the education and the outreach with the addition of these protections, ideally we'll see change in our community, long-term, ideally.
Okay, thank you. If there aren't further questions, I think that we will, Lauren, we'll let you go. You'll keep us in the loop on sort of when it is that you want some actual, input. We may discuss this a little bit more for a little later in this meeting. And thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you all so much.
Yes.
Brant knows how to get a hold of me, so does Nanette. Others do too. I think Helen does too. So if you guys have any questions or need anything, don't hesitate to reach out as well. I'm happy to, if you think of something later on, let me know, or even as your meeting continues, Brant and Nanette can all text me and I'm happy to just shoot an answer back real quick or anything too. So thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
And let's hold off on any further discussion or possible action on that item. I'll introduce Carl Smallwood. He's the co-director of the Divided Community Project at the Moritz School of Law at Ohio State. We had talked a little bit before this spring's events about the potential of bringing in a group whose purpose is to help communities prepare for civil unrest. I think that if you may remember, at the time we had said, I don't know, maybe it's premature, and we put it off. And I think we might have felt like we were really prescient, right, if we had gone forward at that time. And so I got back in contact with them after, recent events and invited Carl to talk to us a little bit about to explain to you a little bit more sort of what they do and what they might be able to offer to us. So, Carl.
Thank you, and I hope you can all hear me. Good afternoon. Yes, Brant thought about reaching out to us and probably thought about reaching out to my predecessor. He's aware of both of my predecessors in this role. I've been with the Divided Community Project formally for about 6 weeks. I've been participating in their activities for the past 5 years. But I appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you and to talk to the Akron Civil Rights Commission. And it sounds as though you're thinking about how most effectively to use the commission in Akron, which is really interesting since it's a relatively new entity. I appreciate the opportunity. The Divided Community Project. Can I share my screen a little bit? Is that okay? I will hit the button to see if something happens. Let's see here. Where are we? I think that's my screen. That's the shot of the Divided Community Project. As the chair said, the Divided Community Project is at the Moritz College of Law at The Ohio State University. And we exist to help leaders learn from others, to address division within their communities, to make their communities more resilient. We have been doing so for 5 years. It was an outgrowth essentially of people around the country who do facilitation and mediation services, who thought there was a role for those kinds of services to help communities. And back in 2015, we used Sanford, Florida, where Trayvon Martin was shot, as sort of a test case to look at how that community responded to the unrest that followed the Trayvon Martin shooting, and managed to get through protests that had attracted national attention without a single arrest. And there were lessons to be learned from the city government, the law enforcement officers, the faith community leaders, and other community leaders, other stakeholders in that community that helped us to design some things that would assist other communities to prepare for unrest. So I'm going to now end, this is I think part of the slideshow, so I'm going to end that and take you straight into the actual Divided Community website, I think. And that's what it looks like if you were just to type Divided Communities Ohio State into your web browser. You come up with this kind of a website. And what you'll see there is that we offer free resources. This is a not-for-profit that works with communities around the country on different issues. And the principal tool we use is a toolkit for community leaders. And if you were to click on this tab, I'm going to just go to the next tab because it's going to be quicker. What you'll find is that has the resources available to community leaders, which are considerations to help them plan for unrest and considerations for planning during unrest. And what we've found is that it's most helpful to plan, to work with your stakeholders, to address the needs of the community, to try to make the community more resilient before unrest begins in the community, because there always are issues that are bubbling below the surface, and you know what they are. And we've worked with people who help communities around the country to develop guides that are available to you. And in a minute, so I don't disrupt what's going on the screen, I'll use the chat box to sort of drop links to these guides for you so that you can take a quick look at them. You know, one of the things that's helpful in these guides, and we worked in communities like Orlando and Columbus and San Leandro, California. We've looked at issues that divide communities along lines of race, along lines of religion, and other sources of conflict within communities, immigrant communities, immigrant and non-immigrant communities, and help those communities work with police forces and other issues that cause division within the community. Ultimately, as well, we've developed a simulation, and I think that was something that maybe also either previous, my predecessor spoke to your chair about or caught his attention. Oops, get that out of the way. I think, well, let me skip that for a second. The simulation is a real-time exercise to help city leaders plan for civil unrest. And the premise essentially is this, that on a Friday afternoon, after there have been some clashes between police and citizens, after there have been some issues involving Muslim students in the community and their high schools that have been harassed, after a number of incidents have occurred, the mayor says, I'm going to be addressing the press at 5 o'clock. And the mayor gathers his or her cabinet together with the police chief and communications people and neighborhoods folks and others to say, I need to tell the press something today at 5 o'clock. Help me put together what I'm going to say. And then you begin the simulation. And as things often happen in the real world, when you're on the brink of unrest, events continue to occur. And so we then essentially help the mayor's cabinet determine how to juggle those unfolding events. That's helpful, obviously, as an exercise. But what's really more interesting is when you unpack all of that. And if you've got about a minute and a half, I'll show you what the mayor of Columbus says about that exercise, because he and his cabinet went through it. Can I do that real quick? Can you hear that?
I can't hear it.
Can you hear it or not?
No, sir.
No. Okay. Well, then maybe I won't be playing it that way, because if that may, I don't know that I'm savvy enough to.
When you started sharing, did you look at the bottom of the share box? There's a check box for sharing your audio specifically. So if you stop sharing and then you start sharing again, check the little box for the audio.
Okay, let me stop sharing. And then if I share again.
Look at the bottom of that screen that pops up.
Okay. Very good. I'll try that. Thank you.
Sure.
Go back.
The Divided Community Project's Midland simulation, which encouraged my staff to consider how to respond to a series of escalating issues dividing the fictional Midland community. The simulation provided a realistic gauge of the mounting tensions that occur between city officials, residents, and community advocates and civic leaders during periods of community division and civil unrest. Following the 2-hour simulation, the Divided Community Project led my staff in a conversation to unpack the lessons of the simulation. Using anonymous polling software, my staff candidly assessed community division and tension in the Columbus community. The project used our responses as a platform to elicit ideas, to enhance the city's community engagement efforts, to leverage the work of community partners, and to begin planning in advance of civil unrest and social crisis. The Midland simulation was an opportunity for my staff to identify how they will support the community during a social crisis and encourage participants to think creatively outside of our traditional silos. Ben Franklin tells us, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. Midland has helped Columbus plan. The Divided Community Project is willing to do the same in your community.
Okay. Now you can also still hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, as the mayor said, now we ran this simulation about 2 years ago for the city of Columbus. The city of Columbus has in the last several months had an opportunity to sort of see how ready they really were. And unlike, or like a lot of communities, what this points out is it's good to prepare. They were more prepared than some communities. I think there was still more work that could have been done. Unfortunately, that's where we are today. So that's one of the tools that we have created that helps communities, helps them identify where opportunities are. In some respects, as I mentioned to the chair, get some partners in the community talking, because when you look at the participants in the simulation, there are roles for a lot of different players. And so what you really do in this simulation is bring together all these elements in the government, and you inject faith leaders, United Way, Hispanic Coalition, Bar Association, Urban League. You inject other stakeholders in the community who, in this fictional 2-hour time frame, want to be heard. And the mayor has to figure out, how do I juggle my time, and how do I get those voices in the room, and what do I do with the voices once they're in the room? So, as I said, it's an interesting exercise. Let me tell you 2 more things about the Divided Communities Project, and I'll stop and answer any questions you might have, because I know your time is precious. We have the bridge community, which, in addition to the training, the types of training that we do for communities, assists the communities that are in some crisis. The first director of the Divided Community Project was the former head of the Community Relations Service of the Department of Justice, Grand Lum. The Community Relations Service of the Department of Justice was created in the '64 Civil Rights Act, essentially to help communities in crisis. Think of them as people who jump in by parachute to help communities when they are in crisis. And they are some of the most skilled community facilitators and mediators and peacemakers in the country. That division still exists, but it's much smaller and much less active in this current administration. So one of their former regional heads is Thomas Battles. Thomas is now part of the Divided Community Project as a consultant for us, and he is working right now with communities in Florida, Georgia, Minnesota. I'm not going to identify the specific communities that he's communicating with, but he is where the hot spots are right now, talking to those communities. He was, at the time, back in the time of the Trayvon Martin events in Florida, the regional director for Florida. So, as I said, the people who we have been fortunate enough to have an association with are people who come from that in part from that background, and they're able to then help communities that, as I said, are actually going through very difficult times, to help them. So, as I said, I won't say too much more. I know your time's precious, but obviously, if there are any questions I can answer, I'd love to do that. And I want you to know that we are a resource that you should feel free to. Let me stop sharing for a minute, and that way, as I said, I can get myself to a chat box, and I'll drop some links for you while I wait to see if you have any questions.
And let me just jump in here and thank you, Carl, and to say that one of the considerations here is, it might not be immediately obvious why the Civil Rights Commission would be the body that invites a group like this to run a exercise like that. But it sometimes is the case that it's helpful for the invitation, because you're going to want all the actual leaders, right, who are going to play themselves in carrying out that simulation, right, to bring their interests to the table. And it's sometimes helpful for that invitation not always necessarily to come from the mayor or to come from a particular interest group, right, who might be perceived in the community as not being necessarily neutral or objective. Now, whether we would be seen as neutral, also a live question, right? I think that we're probably too new to have much of a reputation. Although, people in the know can correct me about that. So anyway, that's part of the reason why, I thought this might be interesting for us to explore, because again, the name Civil Rights Commission, often stands for a body that will engage in activities like this. So questions?
I had a question. Carl, do you all would do, I'm asking, you would do like small group trainings with groups so that they become facilitators? Or would you be meeting with the players as you define them, the Urban League, the United Way, and so forth?
Um, I guess what we have done, I didn't speak specifically about the academy, which I probably should have. That might be most responsive to your question. We've worked with some groups from communities. So the answer to your question would be yes, and. We've worked with some communities where we've sort of asked them to put together let me see if I can find the right tab, and then I'll try and share it. We worked with stakeholders in the community to be able to prepare them for what will confront them in a circumstance where unrest occurs. And so we invite leadership from communities, and they will then bring with them potentially not simply government employees, but also other stakeholders, to begin a conversation, to think about the issues that are bubbling in their community, and think about how to address them. The truth is, what we do is to help communities design systems that will help them become more resilient. And so when you go into our materials, Brant was saying a minute ago that the Civil Rights Commission might be viewed as neutral. In Columbus, there's a group called Columbus Community Trust. It's one of our case studies in this. And it is a group of stakeholders who got together 4.5 years ago or so in the wake of a shooting in Columbus to say there's got to be a way for us to bring together parts of the community to begin to address some of the issues that face us. And so over the course of the last few years, they've been doing so. They're viewed as neutral. Through community trust, we went and talked to the mayor about doing this kind of a simulation to see if, and as you would imagine, there was some hesitancy, some concern, some uncertainty about exactly what they were getting themselves into, or who might see them stumble if they did an exercise and didn't get an A on the test. But eventually, they did. They did that kind of an exercise, and they found it to be useful. Well, you heard the mayor. I think he was sincere when he said, I think he was relieved probably that, that it wasn't on camera, but it was not designed to be that. It was designed to permit them to do some self-evaluation, to figure out where they were, to learn from each other, and to prepare themselves for what was coming ahead. And as we've seen in more recent times, in some of the kinds of responses that you hope for from your city leaders when something goes wrong, it's not as confrontational. It's let's talk. Let's start talking. And sometimes you need a third party. You need a neutral to help you with that conversation. I think that's a long answer to a very short question. I don't know that we are really in the business of training facilitators, start to finish. Mm-hmm. But we're certainly in the business of trying to give facilitators and stakeholders the tools they need to help convene community groups and work through some of the issues that face them to help their communities. And as I said, the case studies that are part of the planning guide that I shared with you earlier, here are the case studies. I think I'm still sharing, right? The case studies, you will see Orlando. There's Community Trust from Columbus. These all arose from different origins. They all have different groups leading them. In Columbus, it was a group of bar associations, majority and minority bar associations. In some communities, it is the Community Mediation Service, the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center in San Mateo, California. So, it's basically a neutral body that convenes and then invites others to the table to begin that conversation.
Carl, who's the we on your end? You look great. Who works with you? I mean, you mentioned, so obviously there are folk at the Moritz School of Law.
Yes.
What is, and I suppose in asking that, I'm asking what is the emphasis, what is the training, what is the philosophy or background?
Okay, there we go. Well, I'm going to show you this part of the website slightly out of date because the project designer who this works. That's why I did all these tabs instead of relying on the internet. Because as I said, I've been on board for about 6 weeks. The leaders, the brain trust behind this is Nancy Rogers, who was Dean of the College of Law, is one of the leading dispute resolution practitioners in the country, and was Attorney General of the state of Ohio for about 9 months some years ago. She and Josh Stolberg, who's my other co-director, who's an emeritus professor and did community mediation training and services for 40 years. They're the ones who then gathered people together 5 years ago from around the country to bring together, as I said, this brain trust to figure out what can we do, we have the skills to do and the training to do is this kind of work. And then, as I said, the people like Grant Blum, who Grant knows, who was at the Community Relations Service as director, and others came together. Becky Monroe is our former director. She's been whisked away. She's still on the steering committee and actively involved, but she's now working on a project at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. So there's a picture of Grant. And the steering committee has got people like Andrew Thomas, who is part of city government in Sanford, Florida, and is engaged there, fortunately for them. You have, as I said, social scientists, you've got other people well-versed. In terms of the staff, though, to answer your question very directly, because I don't want to suggest anything that's misleading. I am a part-time co-director. Since George Floyd was killed, it hasn't been 10 hours a week. It's been more like 50. But that's it. I'm in the right place. I retired from the practice of law after about 40 years, and this is my next stop. And so I bring a slightly different skill set to this project than my predecessors, all of whom were, as I said, people who either parachuted into communities or did that sort of work. I was a trial lawyer for 40 years. So I'm but they think they can train me. Then my co-director, as I said, is Josh Stolberg, who's pictured here, who, as I said, has been a mediator for community conflicts for 4 decades or more. And then our deputy director is a young, well, there's Nancy Rogers, who is former Attorney General. Rachel Brackney on the steering committee is the current police chief in Charlottesville, Virginia. And the Charlottesville unrest and protests were a source of study and inspiration. Unfortunately, the circumstances led to some inspiration for us on ways to help communities, and she's been a part of this steering committee ever since. And then, as I said, last down here is Bill Froelich, who's a fellow, a faculty member of the College of Law. Frankly, in terms of the FTE equivalent, he he has a slightly higher percentage than I do and than Josh does. So there are 3 staff members, and then a number of people who essentially donate their time because this is the area they're interested in. They began working on this several years ago, after the events in Minneapolis some weeks ago. The JAMS Foundation, which is our major funder, called us on a Friday night and said, you guys have been working in this area. We've been supporting you. You know, we want to, you know, we're about to make another gift and we're about to make an announcement because we're investing in this. And so, you know, again, I'm not here to sell the services to you. I guess I'm here to advertise. And so, you know, we try to help communities. As Nancy said, we're just trying to do some good. When she was asking whether I'd consider coming on as a co-director.
We can have further discussion, but there are other questions for Carl.
Well, those were good questions. Okay.
Yes.
No, thank you so much for the opportunity, as I said, to come and visit with you and have a few minutes. I dropped some links. You know how to get hold of me. I really appreciate it. I value your opportunity to talk about, you know, whether we are able to be of some assistance to you in some fashion, and just let me know.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Okay. So let me say this. Let me see. It is now 5:20. A couple of comments first on that last one, and then on these two together. I think that one of the key considerations with regard to their involvement is, you know, in a lot of communities, the problem is that a crisis arises and the mayor doesn't already know the pastor and the community organizer that they need to talk to in order to be able to coordinate how to prevent the fires, right? And doing this kind of preparation puts those people in contact, and they might not be in agreement about a lot of things, but they might find, okay, we should at least exchange phone numbers. We should at least know who to call if something happens. And if Akron already has that, right? If those relationships are already not perfect, but pretty good, then this might seem superfluous, right? I think we mentioned, Cindy mentioned, oh, we've done tabletop exercises. You know, I don't know if they've done similar exercises to this or not. So whether that kind of exercise would be valuable. You could easily see it being valuable in a community where leadership wasn't working together. Like, let's get in the room, let's, you know, walk through the scenario that might never happen, but could happen next week, right? It's like pandemic planning, right? So that's that. Also, full disclosure here, he mentioned Grand Lum, who used to be the director of CRS at the Department of Justice. And he was kind of one of the people who set this up 5 years ago. Grand was my law school roommate, and we knew each other in college in the Bay Area. So there are some connections there. And then the last thing I want to say, and then I just want to open it up for your thoughts. Both of these are in the realm of expanding our scope, right? Expanding our portfolio of the kinds of things that we do. We've been kind of tiptoeing around this. I kind of lined these people up so we could talk about it more directly. It's not as though we have to make a decision. Yes, we're going to do everything and suddenly be a new thing. We can just decide one opportunity at a time. But there is a sort of a background decision here of would we rather just take the complaints that come in and deal with them, which is really our main mandate in the ordinance, right? Or do we want to expand that little educational piece of our mandate to start to do these kinds of things? So your thoughts about either of these projects? Esther, you're muted, of course.
Learning unmute. Good evening, everyone. I sort of want to harken back to the fair housing, the Lauren Green Hall. I loved this presentation, and really, I think to agree with Nanette, it is exactly in our field, our wheelhouse, because there's actual discrimination for people trying to obtain housing, and if we're building, and it just seemed like a natural fit. So I was, in terms of that type of expansion, I'm not sure precisely what type of assistance she was wanting, whether just, I won't say performative support, but title support. I think it's great. I'm all for it, contingent upon what's involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of the idea is just, when they go to city council, can they say the Akron Civil Rights Commission supports it? Like, that's one thing. And then if they end up having hearings or something, maybe they'll ask somebody to, we'll decide to have somebody go and actually offer, verbal support.
Other than verbal support, if we amended our ordinance to, however you want to say it, cover this, include this, I guess, are there any teeth in it from our perspective?
So here's how I would talk about that. A lot of that depends on exactly how the amendment is written, right? And the draft that I've seen kind of simply adds to the list of things that the kind of discrimination that we have jurisdiction over. And if that were the case, then we would have the same powers there as we have with any other discriminatory practice, right? We can have hearings and have issue subpoenas. Then there can be a remedy, and there are potential fines and injunctions that can be done. We haven't done any of those with any of the other categories yet, so we don't have that much experience with it, but it would be the same. Okay. I mean, presumably there would be work with the law department to figure out exactly what the statute should say, to make it work. And so that's all in the fine tuning that will come down the road if this goes forward.
Well, I concur with Esther and with Nanette. We are in a unique position because of the newness of our group in this city and this state. And I think we have a duty to speak to things that represent compassion and fairness. I've never been without a home, so I can't identify, but I think when we find ourselves in these positions to make a difference, we need to use our vocal cords administratively and morally to speak to these things. The timing is right, and the timing is ripe with a P.
It strikes me with both of these speakers tonight, the real, and Brent, thank you for bringing them both to us this evening. I think there's the whole thing of intersectionality. It's not just a house, right? It's not just a Section 8 voucher. It becomes race and class and education and all these things that sit underneath that. And it's not just the time, like you were saying, Brent, what's the connection between the Civil Rights Commission and planning for a civil unrest? And you look at it, it's not just housing and a job and being accommodations. It's how we're treated, how we're regarded, how we're thought of, that leads to those breaks in society and that kind of bubbling over of tension. And I think it really speaks to sort of the educational piece that I've always been interested in, and figuring out how we should have that voice in the public sphere and how best to have it. I think, albeit that there are conversations happening and there's good community relations in Akron, there's never enough of it. There can always be more of it. There's always a question of who isn't at the table right now, and how could we be a place where we could get others yet to the table, you know? And I would encourage, I'm really, Brant, I really thank you for bringing these both to us, because I think it's where we need to be looking at those intersections and at the things that we need to do to shore up the community.
Yeah.
If I might, while I agree wholeheartedly with what everyone is saying, and would love to be a part of both initiatives, I'm wondering, as a new commissioner, if as we are writing in ordinances, will there be limitations to how we can participate and what we can offer?
Will there be limitation? So to be clear, right, it would be city council that would have to consider any amendment to the ordinance. And we would be in the role of a supporting witness, right? We support this, So I don't know if that, would there be limitations? What are you thinking of?
So as I hear what everyone is saying, I understand our role with these. To your point, as a witness, we are supporters. We're there for name recognition. The Akron Civil Rights Council is in support of, with the potential of the commissioners physically being present for some of these activities. With our physical presence, will there be any limitations therein? So we can be a part of a trial, but not a march, that kind of thing. I'm just wondering if there are any limitations in that way.
I don't, John or Ellen or Yamini, I don't think so. For something like this, where we're representing the views of the body, presuming that there's a motion and we vote on it, that strikes me as simply being in the realm of, communication. I mean, I guess it is advocacy.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question correctly. Yeah. So, excuse me, Latanya, if I answer it wrong, but okay. I don't see any hurdle for the commission making a formal, as a body recommendation on this issue. I mean, obviously, I think you guys would be speaking from a position of authority as the body that would be administering it and enforcing it. As for other things, I think the only thing the commission really has to be wary of is conflicts of interest, right? So making sure that you're not taking any action that would put you outside of a neutral position in terms of any case that would come before you. So, I mean, if there's a specific question about, would this be crossing a line, I'm sure the law department would be happy to try to, give you the best advice in that regard. But I think really that's the only concern I would have, is anything that, puts you on a very specific side of a specific issue that could be something that would later come before the body. But in general, saying we think this is an appropriate amendment to the ordinance, I don't see any concern about that.
I would agree with what Ellen said. That was the point I wanted to just again bring to the group, is certainly to be able to present something. Your hurdle is just getting it passed through the legislative body, and to be there present to to indicate that you feel it is appropriate, that this would be something that the commissioners would be properly reviewing, but to be mindful also of with sometimes with a strong level of advocacy. Again, your role as commissioners is a neutral position, as a reminder again, and there is an importance to maintain that impartiality. But again, to advocate for something to be before, as part of a types of cases generally to be reviewing, I don't really see that as being a big problem.
That's exactly what I was asking. So thank you. Appreciate it.
And I thought it was fabulous too, actually. Very interesting. I didn't even realize actually that there was this hurdle. But I guess the question I wonder is how they are receiving these. How would the landlords be aware? Is these vouchers going directly to the landlords? I was wondering was going to ask her that, but you know, a lot of intricacies involved in how they even accept their monies. So.
Yeah, and I can just, if I could just like add to that too, this actually is not the first time I know this issue has been brought up. It actually was recently raised to the administration, actually from some of our homeless care providers who deal with vouchers that are specifically for people who are trying to recover from an incident of homelessness. And so I think that there's definitely a willingness and an openness to this idea, and the right, you know, avenue for trying to address this concern, and this, you know, getting more people into safe, healthy housing is always the goal. And I think if there's a discriminatory, you know, behavior going on, then I think that the administration and the mayor would certainly be open to supporting or, you know, backing this change to the ordinance. So happy to, you know, get that before him as well when this is ready to go to city council, so that, you know, the mayor can be informed.
So I kind of want to move quickly. On this issue, I think at this point we're a little ways away from there being actual language in front of city council and the details and such. But I do think it would be helpful for us to be on the record in supporting the advancement of the concept, right? Supporting the development of legislation to propose to city council that would address discrimination based on the source of payment. So I guess I would entertain a motion that the commission supports not sure exactly how to say this. The commission expresses its support of developing legislation to prohibit discrimination based on the source of payment.
Commissioner Thomas so moves.
All right, is there a second?
Commissioner Pitt.
Commissioner Pitt. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we are in support. On the second issue, that one is a little squishier, right? That one is more, and it would also be more, involves more for us to do, right? Like if we decide, oh yeah, we want to be the group that invites these people, this broad spectrum of people, that's planning, that's who's on the list, that's let's run through the exercise ourselves so we know how it works. That's, you know, that's, so that's a little bit more involvement. And I think is also a little bit, you know, I'm open to hear if you think that this is a important thing, and we shouldn't spend, we have a couple of matters to take care of, including elections. And I don't want to take us too far over. So are there sort of quick reactions? And we can always put it over to the next meeting agenda as well. This one is not an urgent one. Nanette.
Most effectively done in person, so not while the pandemic is happening.
Ah, that is interesting. Yeah, yeah. Other thoughts?
I thought it was a great resource. I remain curious, and I'll be following up with that to understand it more and look for applications in our community. You know, as others have said, you know, there are some of those relationships, people know people and work together, but I always think that strengthening those and bringing outside perspective is helpful. And I'm going to be looking for opportunities to sort of invoke that third party support to continue to bring people together and surface these issues. But yeah.
And one of the things we can do is, you know, we could all explore their website. They have reports that they've drafted for other communities that they've been in. They have sort of all of these guides as he showed us, you know, for what to do and sort of whether we think that'd be worth it. And I guess I'd like to hear from Ellen or maybe Phil even whether this kind of thing sounds like something that this community needs, you know, and you don't have to answer right now, but.
Phil, do you want to say anything? I defer to your.
I was shocked to hear that we're 24th in the nation in the, I guess, the petition in moving people out.
Yes, down the eviction end. That's right.
Yeah, 24th.
For eviction rate. Yeah.
Staggering.
Yep.
My quick, I guess, reaction to the Divided Community Project is also interest and curiosity. We have had some, in my limited time here, we've had some really good sort of like role-playing experiences and some that probably weren't as successful. Of course, I would be interested in making sure if we were going to pursue something like that, we gave it the best possible basis to be as successful as possible. And I think Nanette's point is well taken, which is that, you know, the dynamics of something like this on Zoom might make it not an ideal situation. So, and I'm going to think more about your point, Brand, about whether or not the people around the table know each other and those relationships are well formed. I think I want to think about that. My gut reaction is that we do have a lot of those relationships and people know each other, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't do more or we don't know who we don't know.
Right.
So, you know, I'm gonna think on that.
So as I said, there's time on this one. Any other thoughts?
You know, our church and I are members of the Akron Area Interfaith Council. And about 2 years ago, we started a conversation about, and it began at one meeting I was attending where we spoke about disaster situations where churches become places that can be used by the city and by the community. And I was thinking of situations including civil unrest following, you know, things that we've seen in our country already. And what happened was I left the table a little bit because I couldn't keep my hand on it and as part of the group that was talking about it. And it became very much an active shooter scenario inside of local churches. And that was where it went. And so for me, part of the beginning of that conversation, I had contacted, and I can't remember his name, but the guy who showed us into the basement of City Hall and showed us that, and they were great. We brought faith leaders in and we saw the situational room and we sat there and we had a conversation. But my take on that was certainly from the faith community side, that there is not a robust understanding for all faith leaders across the board of a sense of unity around what even constitutes kind of this time when you could step in. You know, I went to the first protest downtown, and I was the only person wearing a clergy collar, and there was one other faith leader. And I know that at the others there have been responses and there have been other faith leaders, but we don't have a sense of unity across the table, I don't believe, between the different faiths and between the different communities in Akron around these issues. So I think there are small pockets of really good relationships and some large pockets like the Love Akron Network. But I think that specific to this conversation, I think this exercise would be great because he had a really comprehensive list. And I'm talking from my perspective as a faith leader, but I like the way that list looked of all the people you would get in the room together. I thought that was powerful.
So we will continue to be in touch with them and try to figure out when and whether, right, would be a good time to interact with them. If it's all right, let's move on. We have some old business to deal with. I am going to report on complaint 19 ACRC 10. And if you might remember, this is a pretty old complaint and we have let it gather a little bit too much dust and that's largely my fault. But this is Mr. Ryan Winston. Phil had an interview with him earlier on. This is the gentleman who brought his family to the Highland Theater and his daughter had an asthma attack and he went to get some water and some ice and they wouldn't give him water or ice, and he ended up leaving the theater. They gave him his ticket money back, but not his concessions money. So Phil had given a report on that earlier, and I called him and talked to him as well, and got pretty much the same report. There is no. He is convinced that it was a case of race discrimination. There is not any allegation in any of the tellings of the story that that anybody said anything that gives a basis for that. They were denied ice and water at the concession stand. He did tell me that his girlfriend heard a girl say to another girl at the theater, and those are the words, I'm sure they were women, that she didn't like that kind of people, which is maybe the closest that you get. But the girlfriend is not, it's already sort of double hearsay, and the girlfriend is not interested in talking to us or to me. Our standard is whether there's a reasonable, let me go back to pull up this document. I was just looking at it. I was about to tell it to you, and I don't know what. Reasonable cause to believe that discrimination occurred. And my recommendation is to say that there is not. There isn't anything that would give us any evidence other than the basis is just their strong feeling. At this point in our rules, we vote on whether, or the commission determines whether there's reasonable cause to believe that there's discrimination, and then if there is, we sort of go forth to conciliation in the hearing. And if there's not, then we dismiss the case and send them a letter. So if there's any discussion or questions, Phil, I don't know if you have anything else to add. Oh, I will say this, I forgot to mention, I tried several times to call the theater and got no response, and sent a letter and got no response. They're closed, so it's, you know, there may be some, and I do not have any investigative skills to track people down, and I didn't try to use any. So I did not get an interview with the manager at the Highland or any of the staff who were there. But you know, on this is kind of the equivalent of I kind of think of it as the equivalent of a summary judgment, right? Even on the facts as presented, if they were all true, there just didn't seem to me to be much basis there. So any discussion or questions?
I have a question, but oh, there you are. So, and this might have been covered someplace else, but is the Highland in the practice of providing ice water to patrons on a regular basis? I know there was a refusal this time, but I know, you know, so I'm just curious about that. If it's their practice for ticket paying customers who are also purchasing items at the concession stand, or that they didn't purchase a beverage. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's what I would have asked if I had had a chance to talk to them. We could, one option is to put this off until we can, you know, until we can talk to them.
I would just say that just kind of going on the everyman theory, it would not be unreasonable for a patron to ask for a drink of water. Now, when I have attended Regal cinemas, for example, if I have a pill that I want to take before I start indulging in all that popcorn, I could ask for a courtesy cup of water. I don't think that's an unreasonable request. And if I go to the concession stand and say, you know, my child is having an asthma attack, or, you know, someone is choking, can I have a courtesy cup of water? I think that's a humanitarian request. I don't, you know, even if they ran in off the street and said, give me a cup of water, it should be honored. But, you know, when people have purchased a ticket, they're inside, using the amenities and they ask for a courtesy cup of water or ice or whatever, and even indicate that there's some kind of emergency or critical situation, I don't think it's unreasonable to have asked for it, and I don't think it's beyond their scope in terms of service to provide that. The only other thing I would say, and this is in defense of them, if there's any such defense, and that is, it was extraordinarily poor customer service.
Indeed.
So, whether we want to say that it was racially motivated or, motivated by some other means covered under our statute, it's a fine line. Can I be rude to you because I don't like your complexion? Can I be rude to you because I don't like your accent? So there's just some other questions that I have, and unfortunately they are closed. But I'm just saying, what gives you what motivates your ability to be discourteous to people? What's behind that? So that's my only concern.
I will add that my very limited investigative work in the last 5 minutes has shown that the last thing that they posted on both their social media and their website says it is their quote intention to open in early July, if that is relevant information to anyone.
I will say that maybe I have my law professor hat on a little bit too tight. The Supreme Court has said that with regard to discrimination law, that the Title VII is not a civility code, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're allowed to be as rude, and also you're allowed to have very, very poor business judgment, right? You're allowed to be a lousy business person in a lousy restaurant or movie theater, as long as, but if you're not discriminating, if you're just an idiot, right, there's no violation. And I think that logic applies here as well, for what it's worth.
And Esther, to your question, I frequent the Highland Theater, and I have asked for a courtesy cup of water, and I've seen others ask and have been refused regularly and offered to purchase a bottle of water. If that adds context.
It does, it does, but Brent's comments as well, are insightful, because it builds on something that Gina said, which is, yeah, people can be jerks, or they can just get poor customer service, and without that side of, without the other side of knowing, well, yes, and who said what, and triple hearsay and double hearsay, I just, I think they can be poor service, and maybe that's something that, if there's not a finding of probable cause or the finding of discrimination, that it sounds maybe poor customer service, and.
I think Phil, are you trying to get in here?
I think that the gentleman had an opportunity to actually, and I don't know that he was requesting water. I know he was requesting a cup of ice, and he could have got that at a purchase price of a soft drink. So they weren't saying no, they were saying that he could have those, but he had to pay for it.
So it is. It's at your pleasure. We can have a motion to find that there's no reasonable cause to believe that discrimination occurred. We could put it off until we get an opportunity to talk to somebody at the theater so that we can ask the question. It's possible they'd answer the phone and said, yeah, we don't like, right? I think that as the reporter, I'm gonna not make a further recommendation other than what I already did.
I would say, based on what Latanda said, I could see that happening, where they would say, no, you can't have it, or you can buy it, or, you know, so I'm, from my perspective, I also frequent there, and they appear to be kind of a mom and pop shop. So that's, I would yield to Brandt's view and just say no probable cause here.
Would you want to word that as a motion, Gina K?
Yes, I move that we find no probable cause on the matter of Winston versus the Highland Theater.
I will second that motion.
There is a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion carries. So that resolves. John, you'll draft a letter.
I will.
Okay.
It'll go to it'll go to both parties.
Right.
Yes.
The other item on our Nanette, is there a report on your outstanding case?
No, investigation is ongoing.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Sorry.
That's right. We have a new complaint. John, that new complaint appeared to me to be in Talmadge and outside of our jurisdiction. Is that right?
That is correct.
So do we take a vote on that?
I believe you do.
Okay.
I believe you do. You just make a finding that it's not a proper complaint and it should be dismissed.
Right. This is not within our jurisdiction. The discrimination complained of is not within our jurisdiction to cover, so we can't act on it. Does anybody want to make that motion? Actually, I'll make that motion. That this complaint appears to be in the city of Talmadge and is not within our jurisdiction. And is there a second?
A second.
Latanda seconds. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. There are other discussions. I think that we can put all of them off. I'm just going to pause here, and I'm sorry that we don't have maybe a little bit more time, but you know, as we mentioned, Cindy Chrisman, she was one of the founding commissioners. She was very active in all of our activities. She was out in the community talking about the commission. She was totally the moving force behind getting the grant to get brochures and posters printed up. She really pretty much, I feel bad that I didn't offer more support. She pretty much single-handedly made those things happen. And so just to publicly recognize her service on the commission. And as a former police officer, I think that her perspective will be missed as well. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything. Yes, happy, yeah, jazz hands for Commissioner Chrisman. We have to elect officers. Our officers are chair, vice chair, and secretary. We are running out of time. With your indulgence, I don't know that this will take long, that we'll try to get this done today. I guess we should start to see whether there are any nominations for chair of the commission.
I would like to nominate Brent.
Second that nomination.
We have a nomination and a second. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none. Do we have to vote? Yes. All in. I feel funny running this meeting.
4 votes.
What's that?
We need 4.
We need 4. So if too many people abstain, we're in trouble. All in favor of electing me as chair for the next year, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that position is filled. I did not hear, but we of any interest, but we're gonna. This is arm twisting time, so Commissioner Maddox has indicated I hope you saw the email that she would like to not continue. I would also like to recognize her. She also has been with us from the beginning. She's not leaving, she's staying on as commissioner, but stepping down as vice chair. Also has been one of the active members in presenting to the community, developed a PowerPoint for us. And so recognizing her service as the vice chair. Thank you. Any nominations to serve as vice chair for the forthcoming year?
I would like to nominate the Right Reverend Nanette Pitt.
Is there a second? I will second.
Yes.
Commissioner Belcher seconds.
Thanks.
Commissioner Pitt, are you willing to serve? She's nodding.
Big shoes to fill. I'm gonna have to have some Gina K shoes to fill.
There we go.
You have good shoes, Gina K, both literally and figuratively.
Any other nominations? Seeing none, let's call for a vote. All in favor of electing Commissioner Pitt as vice chair of the commission, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? And that office is filled. The office of secretary has been vacated by Commissioner Christman. So the table is open for nominations for that position.
I would just like to make the joke that since Nancy is not here tonight, that she should be nominated.
That's what you always do. You know that, right?
Right.
Brilliant.
Ooh.
Well, I wonder if, Latonda, you're open to a nomination since you're taking notes tonight.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Then I would nominate you.
I will second.
Fabulous. We got a smile. Yes, I think that pretty much counts as a enthusiastic step forward. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, all in favor of Commissioner Belcher as secretary of the commission, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Congratulations to all the new officers.
I should have said I was nominating Susie.
I'm humbled and honored. Thank you.
And do we have any other urgent business? Oh, the amendment. Is that something we can put till next time?
It is. If anybody had any feedback, any strong feelings one way or the other, it might help me tweak it for next time, and you could still keep it on the agenda and, you know, consider it for next month.
Remind me, this is the one that's about.
You were concerned about the possibility if one party was represented by an attorney, it might be unfair if they reached a settlement agreement. So before you
That's right. That's right.
Before you would dismiss that complaint, you would want to see the settlement terms.
Yes, let's put that off. We don't have any complaints that are anywhere near, any more complaints that are anywhere near settlement at this point. So I think that we can safely put that off. The last thing I want to say is before we adjourn, if we continue to be interested in activities beyond the resolving complaints, I just want to raise the possibility that I mean, there's lots, right? There's lots we could do. We could ask to be involved in the development of recommendations that to the, on the task force on racism as a public health crisis. We could ask to be, involved in a lot of things. To the extent that some ideas like that come up, please let me know. We can put them on the agenda. To the extent that we do more things like that, it may involve meeting more frequently, right? Because doing stuff like that on a once-a-month basis. So even this legislation that we just said that we are going to support, if that comes before City Council for some reason quickly, right, we may end up calling a special meeting to approve some statement or something. So just to let you know, eyes open, that as we start to do these things, it may change some of the requirements of what we do. But with that, are there any other comments for the good of the order? Did we get any public comments?
We did not. We didn't get any. This was the first month, so as we go, progress, hopefully the public comment option will become more well known.
Okay. All right. If there is nothing further, then we will say that this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Right.
Nice.
All right.